Welcome everyone to the second in the series of Friday Don't Bug Me webinars. I appreciate you all dialing in. During this webinar, you will be able to type questions and comments into the chat box. And we have four moderators, Dr. Kathy Flanders and Sally Lee from the Alabama Cooperative Extension System, as well as Dr. Bart Dries and others from the Texas AgriLife Extension System. These folks have been generous and willing enough to help us answer these questions as we go along. At the end of the webinar, we will take time to answer any questions that were not addressed during the presentation, and there's also going to be some survey questions that we would like for you all to answer. Today's presenter in the Don't Bug Me webinar series is Dr. Paul Nestor, a Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service Program Specialist working in integrated pest management. Dr. Nestor will be discussing identification of and control measures for nuisance tramp ant species.
I guess it's my time, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Paul Nestor. I'm going to be handling this version of the ant webinar today. First off, what I'd like to do during this presentation is, number one, is familiarize you with general ant morphology, such as general characteristics we look at when we attempt to identify an ant. And then we're going to go through the simple life cycle of an ant. And when I do this, I want to stress at what part of the life cycle we want to really target our control strategies. Because when we think about control, we talk about strategies, not strictly just reaching for a jar of pesticide and spraying. And so, and then we're going to touch on the concept of integrated pest management and what it means. And then we're going to briefly discuss the tawny crazy ant and the Argentine ant. Now, most of this discussion on those two ants will be focused on Texas, but hopefully we have some of the other specialists where if there are any specific questions on other areas, those can be answered. So, whenever we identify ants, sometimes ants get confused with other species. And if we see here, we have a picture of what we call a velvet ant, which is really not an ant at all, but a solitary wasp. When we think about ants, well, they do have a pinched waist. They're a member of the Hymenoptera order, which is bees, wasps, and ants. They have a pinched waist, but they also have one or two pedicels, we also call them nodes, between the thorax and the abdomen, and they also have an elbow joint in the antennae. When we look at just general basic ant anatomy, I will be referring to the ant, the head and antennae, also the thorax and legs and the abdomen. Now, if you're a myrmecologist or someone who deals with ants, it would be called the head, the mesosoma, the petioles, and the gaster. But for our purposes, we're just going to talk about the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, because that's just the general body parts of insects, and that way we won't get confused when we talk about the parts of the ant. Whenever we look at an ant, one of the first things we'll see is the dominant antennae, and some of them have enlarged distal segments on the antennae, such as the fire ant, and others will not. They'll just have straight segments. And usually there can be one or two segmented club if it's present, like on the fire ant. When we talk about the antennae, when we talk about the numbering, it's very important we count the antenna segments. First off, the basal end, or the scape, is the first antenna segment. Then we proceed down the antennae from the first node all the way down to the last part of the antennae. So that's how we count those. Some ants will have 9 segments. Others may have up to 12 or 13. If I see an ant that has a 9-segmented antennae, I pretty much say that must be a Brachymyrmex or a rover ant, and I pretty well have that one taken care of. But then counting the nodes of the antennae can be very, very important when you start to ID the ant that you're looking at. We also have what we call the petiole. Now that is the 2 nodes between the thorax and the abdomen. Going to move this area here, thorax and the abdomen, then we have the 2 nodes, or the petioles. Some ants have 1 node, some ants have 2 nodes, and then the shape of the node is very important. We start to ID. So whenever we look at different things, we'll look at the antennae, the number of segments. We'll look to see whether or not the ant has 1 or 2 nodes, and then we can start with the IDing process. Some ants have a single node versus the double node, And the shape of this node can be very important. We look at the carpenter ant, and we're going to be talking about the Argentine ant. They have a very pointed single node, as opposed to another ant, which is the odorous house ant, which can be confused with the Argentine ant. It has more of a rounded and a more flattened node between the thorax and between the abdomen. At the very end of the abdomen, we have some modified female organs, and sometimes we have what's called an acetopore, which is a circle of hairs. This area here. We can also have just an open gland area, such as this. There's no hairs. Now, this is what we find on the Argentine ant. The circle of hairs we will find on the tawny crazy ant, or we also know it as raspberry crazy ant in Texas. So sometimes I might use that name, interchangeably, as opposed to the fire ant, which has a stinger. And all of these are modified female structures, and they are normally used to disperse some type of defensive compounds. And we'll see that both in all the different ants. In the raspberry crazy ant or the tawny crazy ant, we have a circle of hairs. In the Argentine ant, we will have just the anal slit or the anal gland area. And then in the fire ant, we will have the stinger. Many ants will have different sizes. We call this polymorphism. If we look at the fire ant, there's many different sizes of the workers. They just range from the smaller ant up to the size of the queen, as opposed to the Argentine ant or the tawny crazy ant, which we have just a single size. We call it monomorphism, where we just have one size of worker ant. So for collecting ants for ID, it's important to have several of the worker ants, so then we can see if they are the same size or if there's a difference in size. Now, you need to have worker ants to identify ants. Worker ants to identify ants, because most all of the keys are based on worker ants, except for the raspberry crazy ant or the tawny crazy ant, which is Nylanderia fulva, and then there's Nylanderia pubens, which are indistinguishable between each other, except when you look at the male winged alate or the male ant, and then when you have to actually look at the genitalia, and the difference in the way the genitalia looks and its a structure determines whether or not you have those two species. So in that instance, you do have to have one of the mating pairs, which is the male, to be able to ID between the species of Nylanderia fulva or Nylanderia pubens, which is the Nylanderia fulva is the tawny crazy ant. When we look at basic ant anatomy, here's just another quick comparison of the Nylanderia fulva, which is the tawny crazy ant. We can see the shape of the single node between the thorax and between the abdomen, as opposed to the red imported fire ant, where we have the thorax and abdomen. In between there, we have two very dominant nodes, which is the petiole and the postpetiole, and those again are the ID and characteristics we use between these ants. I also want to let you see the difference in the antennae. We look at the Nylanderia fulva. The first node or the first antennal segment is very, very long, which is longer than the head, as opposed to the fire ant, which the first antennal segment is shorter than the head. So again, looking at these different characteristics help us to ID these ants and know which ones we're dealing with, so we can have the correct control strategy for the ant. Now let's look at the life cycle. We've strictly gone through some of the ideas or some of the things for IDing the ants, which is very important, but then we also need to understand the ant life cycle to know when or where we need to focus our control strategies. Ants they have complete metamorphosis, which means the queen lays an egg, the egg hatches into a larval stage, which is several instars to the larval stage, which then goes into the pupa, which is the pre-adult stage, which then hatches, and then either hatches as a winged alate or hatches as a worker, depending on which brood you have, whether you have a reproductive brood, which is the eggs, the larva of the ant in the ant nest, and then then the pupa then emerges into either a worker ant or into a queen ant, and or a winged alate, which is the male or female. If you look at this life cycle, the place we want to target control is targeting the queen and the immatures. If you target the worker ants, you can kill worker ants all day long, but as long as the queen is laying eggs, she will constantly be able to replenish the worker ants. By controlling the queen and immatures, you can control your next generation of ants. The immatures, your next generation, and think of the queen as your future generations. So whenever we look at ant control strategies, we want to target queen and immatures, with the worker ants will then slowly die once the queen and immatures are gone. So we think of the ant life cycle, all the ants, whether it be fire ants, tawny crazy ant, Argentine ants, all of them have a very similar life cycle, and that's what we want to target to make sure that we control our next generation of ants so we'll have a nice reduction in our population. Now, we talked about the life cycle. We've kind of talked a little bit ID and characteristics. Let's talk about integrated pest management and what we need to do to develop control strategies. We talk about integrated pest management. It is the management of pest populations using systems of complementing control strategies that maintain pest populations at levels that can be tolerated by humans in terms of their economy, health, and or quality of life. So let's look at that statement again. It is the management of pest populations. I'm not saying the control, it's the management of them using systems of complementing control strategies. I'm not saying that you want to use strictly a pesticide, but there are different things we can do to put pressure on a population. So whenever we do need to use a pesticide, we can, or the pesticide will be much more efficacious because you have less insects to deal with. And we want to maintain the population at a level that can be tolerated by humans. Of course, some humans have a smaller tolerance for insects than others, so it's going to be up to them to develop a strategy to keep that population at the level that's going to benefit them when we talk about economy, health, and or quality of life. So if we look at integrated pest management, it focuses on the long-term suppression of pests. We're not talking about you getting rid or eradicating, just a long-term suppression. It is proactive rather than reactive. I mean, you want to do something constantly, whether it's an altering of the environment or some repairs to the house, something like that to help keep the pest population low in your area. It will use a combination of tactics. This may be mechanical control, it may be cultural control, it may be pesticide, just depending on what level of control you want. And by doing this, we're going to minimize pesticides' negative impact on the people and the environment. Why? Because by using these other strategies, we are reducing the total population, means that we will have less application of pesticides to an area, which will minimize their negative effect. Integrated pest management strives to be economical. Now, this doesn't mean that first treatment is going to be economical. It just means over time, by keeping pressure on the population you're dealing with, you're going to keep the numbers low, and then anytime we do use a pesticide or any other type of control strategy, we'll be much more efficacious at that time. So that's what, when we talk about integrated pest management, we want to use a group of control strategies to keep pressure on a population to make sure that it stays low and it doesn't affect us. We're starting off with knowledge. Knowledge is extremely important. I already mentioned about the life cycle, where we want to focus our intents for ant management, and then we want to develop a plan or strategy for that. So knowledge is very important when we talk about integrated pest management. It's knowing your pest, knowing its habits, and knowing what you can do to help minimize their effect on you. Proper identification is always important. Of course, different pests have different control strategies. We'll see it the different ants. Certain ants will react to certain baits, others won't. It's very important to have them identified by a pest professional, and this hopefully would be would utilize one of your county extension agents within your state. You can collect a sample of the damaged item or droppings in some cases. That helps to identifying like carpenter ants versus some of your termite species. So you want to collect a nice sample, or you can take a digital image. A digital image can be very important, but I do stress that if you take an image, don't try to take that very special close-up of the insect. Let's try to take a series of pictures. One, we can take a picture of where the insect is, the habitat, maybe a close-up of some of the damage, and then if we can get a picture of the insect itself with something that will let us know the size. Size is very important. So if we can take a series of pictures, and those can be either sent by email or whatever other type of electronic method you use to your pest professional, then they can help determine what the insect is. So, of course, having the exact species or the specimen helps, but many times in this age of electronics and all, a good digital image or a series of digital images can go a long way in helping us ID the pest. Now, when we talk about control strategies, I always already mentioned about, knowing the insect itself, while also knowing the habitat or knowing the way it lives helps a lot also. If we look at for a pest problem, there has to be three things present. You're going to have a moisture source or water, you're going to have food, and you're going to have a place for them to live. When all of these three things are present, you can begin to have a pest problem. If these do not go unaltered, then the pest problem can grow. If we can remove one of these things, such as the moisture source, remove the place it lives, as in the harborage, or alter or remove the food, we will start to decrease the pest population. Whenever I talk to homeowners and all about controlling pests, I always tell them that a pesticide will only give you about 85 to 90% reduction in a certain population. I would much rather have 90 or 85 to 90% control of 1,000 insects than 85 to 95% control of 100,000 insects. If I can go in and somehow alter the habitat by altering the food availability, removing the moisture source, or somehow affecting the place they live, the harborage, I can go a long way in reducing the pest population. So if I do have to use a pesticide, the pesticide treatment will be much more efficacious. So the pest triangle is very important. Whenever you start to try to control, you can look at the habitat, look at where the pest is, and see if there's some way you can alter that habitat instead of just grabbing for some type of pesticide. Just look how you can alter that, and then you can begin to reduce the population. If you do have to use a pesticide, it will be much more efficacious, and you'll be much more satisfied with the control. Control tactics, there's several things out there. Cultural sanitation. You can eliminate water sources and pest habitats. Certain gardening, there may be bed preparation. If you're talking about row crops, there may be row crop or crop rotation. Extremely important. Mechanical and physical. You can trap insects. You can remove infested branches. There can be hand picking. There's a lot of things that you can do to start to destroy a habitat. When we talk about some of the tramp ant species, that they tend to tend some of the honeydew-producing insects, which is the sweet secretion of some of these insects that the ants feed on. If we can do something to modify that or control those insects or take care of that habitat, we can go a long way in starting to reduce the presence of the ants that are there. In some instances, we might introduce natural enemies. I know many of us have heard about the forward fly for fire ants. There's a lot of things out there that we're working with for some biological control, but it does take time, and also introducing natural enemies is an option. Sometimes for the homeowner, it may not be the thing of choice at the time. And then at the very end, which is always the last thing we want to look at, the use of chemicals, use the minimal amount as possible in reducing the number of applications. So by performing some type of cultural or mechanical tactics may help us in reducing the amount of chemical used, and then when we do use it, we'll be much more satisfied with the level of control. So that we've now discussed just basic ant morphology, ID, and characteristics, how you need to maybe get a pest professional or involved with the IDing of the pest to make sure you know what you're controlling. Once you know that, then we can look at our IPM strategies, what we can do to alter habitat and all to start reducing the population, and then if necessary, we can choose some type of chemical. Let's start talking now about the two ants that I'm going to be discussing. One is the Argentine ant, and the other is the raspberry crazy ant, or now it's called the tawny crazy ant. Okay, and they're what we call the Tramp ants. And there's several Tramp ants out there. They always tend to follow human activity. The imported fire ant, black crazy ant, ghost ant, rover ant, big-headed ant. There's several of those out there that we call Tramp ants. Now, what are Tramp ants? Normally, Tramp species have common features that enable them to be highly successful invaders. First off, they are able to hitchhike with human travel and establish colonies, new regions all over the globe. So just our mobility as a society over the years has helped move a lot of these species from area to area. They are omnivores. They will eat almost anything. So whenever you transplant them someplace, they are going to be able to find plenty of food to survive. They're not aggressive to the same species from different nests. So Argentine ants are not aggressive to Argentine ants. Tawny crazy ants are not aggressive to tawny crazy ants. In Texas, because we have multiple queen fire ants in many of the mounds, a lot of times the fire ants are not aggressive to other fire ants in an area. But these species are aggressive to other ant species. In our area, the tawny crazy ant, if it's present, you will not have fire ants. Fire ants will not hang around. In fact, I've also witnessed the tawny crazy ant invading pyramid ant nests and scavenging the brood from the pyramid ant nest. So that means that they're very aggressive against other ant species, and which means that they will tend to take over an area very quickly. They have colonies with many queens and many nests. They will nest under or in anything. We talk about the tawny crazy ant, you will see that they nest under landscape rock. Anything that touches the ground, you're going to find them there. They don't have a dominant nesting area. And then they disperse by budding. Normally, when I think of a fire ant, I always think of a mating flight. When we talk about some of the other Tramp ants, they tend to disperse by budding. Queens and a group of workers separate from the colony, and they'll just essentially walk to a new site. They'll still have matings and mating flights. They may be close to the ground, but they easily disperse by budding. They do not have to have a mated queen to start a new, well, they have to have a mated queen, but they don't have to have one just fresh from nuptial flight. The mound itself can bud, and then you'll have queens and a group of workers separate, and then they will have a new area. We talk about the tawny crazy ant and some work that has been done down in East Columbia, Texas. They move about 300 meters a year. And this is some work that Dr. Danny McDonald has finished up, and it's pretty interesting to see that you don't normally see a mating flight with the tawny crazy ant, but they do move readily on the ground. There are several new pest ants. What's a new pest ant? Ants become more pestiferous in Texas. One is the Argentine ant, Linapithema humili. You have the tawny crazy ant, Nylanderia fulva. We are seeing the Texas leaf-cutting ant that is not a Tramp ant, but because a lot of the development in forested areas and all this normal habitat, this ant is becoming more of a pest status because it is involving effect on structures and all with some of the massive nests that it has. And then we're starting to see another new little ant, the roverant, small brachymermic species in the area. But we're going to focus this last part of the discussion on the Argentine ant and the tawny crazy ant, or Nylanderia fulva and Linapithema humili. We look at the Texas map. We'll first off start with the Argentine ant. You can see there's different areas around the state, and I think you can see if this being a ant or a tramp ant that follows human activity, you can see that maybe it was transported to different areas through different means, whether that be some type of camping, campers, or it could be movement of nursery stock or movement of hay. I'm not really sure. There's still a lot of work to be done on that, but you can see that they are able to move around. This is a close-up of the Lake Somerville area in Texas, which shows the population of Argentine ants has become a problem there, where we have been conducting some research on the past several years using some different type of baits. Sometimes they've had to close down the camping sites due to the presence of the ant in these areas. So it is really becoming a problem. And if you look at this, was it brought in through transportation, through campers? I'm not quite sure, but it is becoming a problem there and in other parts of the state. I do know that along the Texas area here, between Texas and Louisiana, there's the Sabine River runs down this border area. The Toledo Bend Reservoir is on there, and the Argentine ant has become a problem in many areas along the Sabine River and in Toledo Bend Reservoir area, where, again, people come in on the weekends. Have they brought the ant in? There's, I think, a very good reason to think they might have, and it has established itself and become a problem in certain areas there. Now, we'll look at the Argentine ant. We want to notice that, first off, the Argentine ant does have, where'd my pointer go? There it is, a single node between the thorax and the abdomen. It's a very pointed node. This is very important because the Argentine ant is pretty indistinguishable between the odorous house ant, and one of the ways that you are able to distinguish them is that the Argentine ant has this very pointed node, single node between the thorax and the abdomen. As far as the odorous house ant, though, tends to have a more flat node and not as pointed. That is one of the IDing characteristics. So it's very important to have the ant ID'd because the control strategy will be just a little different. Also see the antennae. The antennae is just a little longer than the head as opposed to tawny crazy ant. And then we want to notice that the ant itself has reduced number of setae, which is the very large, coarse type of hairs. It does have some pubescence, very, very, very minimal. In fact, I like to call this like the Ferrari of ants because it's very, very sleek looking. It does have an harrow-shaped abdomen. It can be dark brown, has a thin body and leg, and the hairs are very, very short. If you see this ant along the ground, it can be confused with the tawny crazy ant until you look at it under a scope where you see the absence of the large setae, you see the much shorter antennal segment, and then right off the bat you know that it is the Argentine ant. It again is about a medium ant, about an 1/8 to 3/16 inch. It's dark colored, smooth, hairless, pointed node. It is monomorphic. There is a single size of the workers. This is one of the ants that tends to have an odor. There's several ants. It's the Argentine ant, the odorous house ant, the cheese ant. And when they're crushed, they'll have kind of a musty smell when crushed. And this ant also has the anal gland, or the slit in the back of the thorax, does not have a stinger, does not have a circle of hairs, and that from that little slit it can disperse defensive compounds when it comes in contact with other ants. The trails can be loose. The ants can move swiftly. In some instances, these numbers can get very, very, very high. And so that then it becomes a numbers game with trying to control the insect. Many times, the numbers of ants just overcomes your insecticide treatment, and your treatment gets diluted within the biomass of ants. You essentially lose your effective dose. So it's very important that a control strategy for this ant would be that throughout the year, removing a habitat, doing something that will limit its ability to reproduce, and then using other types of baits and all as necessary. It is easy to confuse with the odorous house ant. Again, this ant does have the single node, very, very, very pointed, and whether the odorous house ant is not as pointed. Also, the odorous house ant tends not to have the numbers of ants that this ant will have, and then this ant, the Argentine ant, is mostly found outdoors. And interestingly enough, it can be associated with the base of trees. You might see it around the base of trees and see the ant going up and down the larger trees. So a lot of times you'll see a little nesting area below the trees, as opposed to the tawny crazy ant, in which you will not see a specific nesting area. These ants have been known to form super colonies. There has been reports out in California where these ants have just very, very huge numbers. They can bite, but they don't sting. As I mentioned, in Lake Somerville, some areas have been closed for camping just because of the sheer numbers, the nuisance to campers, and they do not respond well to fire ant bait. So this is something that you have to work with, and they might need some type of a sugar bait or some type of liquid bait strategically placed throughout an area to help manage these ants. We talk about Argentine ant control. The nests are located outside. They can be drenched with residual insecticide. All these ants are just insects, so any good insecticide will help control them. It's just getting the insecticide to the ants to help, to make sure that you can control them. They can be used by using a simple compressed air sprayer. Of course, colonies found in flower beds, mulch, and leaf litter, they can be treated, but you need to use a low pressure. You just don't want to spray and disperse the mulch and all the leaf litter. So you want to use a low pressure, but a good general broad spectrum insecticide. Some that come to mind are synthetic pyrethroids, such as bifenthrin, lambda-cyhalothrin, and some of those can work real well with controlling this ant. When they become numerous and are the dominant species, perimeter treatments can help repel foraging ants, prevent them from reinfesting the property. Though, as I mentioned, when the numbers get so high, it almost seems like you haven't treated an area because they can just overcome the treatment. So you have to be very, very careful and identify the ants, and then the control strategy may be difficult. Sometimes it's patience and persistence when you talk about controlling ants. Whenever you do use an insecticide, you should look at a wettable powder or a microencapsulated formulation. These products tend to have a little longer residual in an area, and this longer residual will help repel the ant or help maintain control over a period of time. Now, if colonies cannot be located, as I mentioned, like below the base of a tree, that can be treated directly, you can use bait insecticides, and some insecticides do include some of the sugar baits or some of the liquid baits. Can be put out strategically located in different areas that these ants can feed on. They do not respond well to fire ant baits. There are some continuing research going on with different bait formulations, and so hopefully that will be productive in the near future. If you have the Argentine ant indoors, any type of a dust or aerosol that's used through small cracks around baseboards, you can use these to treat nests inside wall voids. And then regular follow-up visits are extremely important with these ants, because you might have a specific thing you use. You need to come back and make sure that you're maintaining control, or if it's not working, alter your strategy to see if there's something else you can do to start to reduce the population of this insect. Now, So that's the Argentine ant. It has become a problem in different areas. It can be found in the southeast U.S. It's also found in Oklahoma, Arizona, Maryland, Oregon, Wisconsin, and then in Texas, as I mentioned. So it can be a common ant. So it's very important if you see a ant in an area. It's very important to get it ID'd to make sure that what species you have, and you can direct your control strategy towards it. The next ant I want to discuss is Nylanderia fulva. This ant has been worked with Tom Raspberry since 2002, where he's one that first was called on it and ID'd it in an area around Pearland, Texas, in the Houston Ship Channel area, where it was an ant that was becoming a pest. And so Tom started working with it and noticed it just wasn't, just normal ant he'd worked with before. So Texas A&M got involved with it, and we started to find out that this ant can be a very severe pest, especially in industry and all. It recently was ID'd as Nylanderia fulva, and the reason I call it the tawny crazy ant, that is a proposed common name, but fulva is Latin for tawny. So tawny crazy ant is a good common name, and it would be synonymous for us for the raspberry crazy ant, because that's kind of what we've known it as since Tom Raspberry has been working with the ant in our area. So locally, it'll probably still be called the raspberry crazy ant. Now this ant, like I said, was worked with Tom and Texas A&M back beginning about 2002. It's a little different than the Argentine ant. The first thing you notice that where the Argentine ant was very slick, like I call it the Ferrari of ant, this ant looks like it hasn't shaven for a couple of days. It kind of has a very rough, gruff look. You look at the long scape of the first antennal segment is very long, much longer than the head as opposed to the Argentine ant. You will see these very dominant standing microceti along the thorax and abdomen and along the head. One thing that recently, since this ant has been identified as Nylanderia fulva, one of the IDing characteristics is there is a pubescence that's on the side of the thorax that's noticed and kind of sets it apart from other Nylanderia species. This is also very common for Nylanderia pubens. So both of these ants are almost, it's hard to tell them apart except by looking at the male weaned alate. So for us, though, since Nylanderia fulva is a dominant ant in the area, if we see it, we're pretty certain that it is the tawny crazy ant. But, it's always good to have specific IDing characteristics. If we can get the male, we can make sure that it is Nylanderia fulva in the area. It does have a single node between the thorax and the abdomen. It's kind of a pointed node. It does have a very long femur. And they do have the acetopore, which is a circle of hairs at the abdomen that it uses to disperse its defensive compound. It does not sting, similar to the Argentine ant. It doesn't sting either, as opposed to the fire ant, which does have the stinger, has a very complex venom that when you're stung, you can get the little white pustule. Some people can go to anaphylactic shock, and others then possibly can have a very hypersensitive reaction. With these ants, though, you will tend to maybe have a slight bite, but nothing that's that I consider to cause of any type of concern. In fact, I've never had one ant bite me, and they can be all over your hands at one time. So they are about 2 to 3 millimeters long. They are monomorphic in that they only have one size worker, as opposed to the fire ant, which has many workers, and it's similar to the Argentine ant, which has a single size of worker. One of the things we used to look at, and we still do, is we will look at the large macroceti on the thorax. When we see that on the thorax, we'll know right off the bat that is probably the Nylanderia species, that being a brown color. And then we'll quickly look for the pubescence that we'll see on the sides of the thorax. And that pubescence will tell us that we do have probably Nylanderia fulva / pubens. but since we're in the Texas area, it's probably going to be Nylanderia fulva. Key points about this ant. Number one, it will nest under mulch and shrubbery. So if you are having mulch brought in, I always tell the homeowners I deal with is to check the mulch to make sure there's no ants that are crawling around, because that could really mean problems in a couple of years. They can nest under pavement, they can nest in walls, under trash, debris, and potted plants, anything that's in contact with the soil. And if there's moisture, you can turn these over and you will see an abundance of worker ants, an abundance of brood, and more than likely several queens. Trails can be over 100 feet from outdoors to indoors, and because of the sheer numbers of these ants, they can be difficult to control. The colony does have multiple queens. We call it mini nests, polydomous. They will nest in any object, and then the foraging trails are plentiful in the summer, during the cooler part of the day. Mainly this ant population will start building in late April, May. We'll see it reach a peak in late July, August, and then slowly the population will taper off sometime in late September, October, and this might be rushed up by a hurricane in our area, maybe some cooler temperatures, and then the population seems to go down to zero, with it starting over again with the being able to see the workers appear again in late April and May. Most of the time we will target control strategies early on with trying to make sure that the habitat is not there for the ants, and then if we do any treatments, we're probably looking at sometime in June. They have been known to forage indoors, and they do displace other ant species. As I mentioned, if you see the raspberry crazy ant, you will not see fire ants. Let's go ahead and start the video if we can get it going here. I want to show this, kind of show the intensity of the Nylanderia. We'll wait for it to start. It's coming on here in a second. Everyone just to get your popcorn, and is it going to play?
It's playing for us?
It is. It's not playing for me. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm gonna flip the whole stack of shit stack of stuff.
Well, if the video is being shown, what we're seeing a population of the mine's showing that. See this population of Nylanderia fulva, and this is on siding of the homes. And what I want you to really look at is, hopefully it'll keep loading and be able to see it. Is as they start to lift up the siding, is the amount of ants that is underneath the siding itself. When you think about it, this is very high contrast with the siding, the white siding versus the ant. But when it pans out to the large area, the same intensity of this species is seen on the sides around the shingles and on the car tire that you see in the area there. So you will see these ants, and this is what's normal. The ants, the numbers can be so great that it's very, very hard to treat. You think about how can you treat that siding to really control the ants? You can't just lift everything up. So the presence of these ants, just the sheer numbers, are a problem. You'll also notice that as the video ends, you will see the boot, that is actually Tom Raspberry, but you will see his boot and the ants crawling on the boot. And you see that they can be very, very much of a nuisance if they're in an area. You think about sitting outside trying to enjoy the outdoors, and all of these ants can be a sheer nuisance. So I'm going to go ahead and, there we go, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so now where are they now? Well, if you think about in Texas, we have seen their numbers grown from a couple of counties, which the first place they were ID'd. This is Harris County here. This is where I'm calling from. And this is one of the first areas that the ant was found in. And since that time, since 2002, you can see that we are now up to 24, maybe more counties. I haven't heard the latest number. But they're starting to move out. I think more people are becoming more aware of the ants, so we're seeing them in the different areas. Okay, and we have 24 counties. These ants are also being ID'd in Louisiana, Mississippi, North Florida, but they have not heard of them being ID'd in Alabama or Georgia yet. And that's, if we're not being looked, they're being missed, or if there's a reason they're not there, we don't know. But if you also look at this map of Texas, you see that the counties are kind of moved about. A lot of times this is due to the movement of possibly containerized nursery plants, maybe the movement of hay, different things around there that's caused these ants to be moved to different areas. Plus, they are a tramp ant, just a general movement with human activity can cause these ants to move about. So we're very concerned. We tell homeowners that they see a suspicious ant, especially in numbers, to please get with their extension agent in the county so they can make sure ID'd or make sure we know where this ant is. Now, what type of concerns? Since we now know the genus species, Nylanderia fulva, we can look at other parts of the U.S. to see what type of problems they've had there, what we might be, or what problems we might have in the future. It has been a serious pest in rural and urban areas of Colombia and in South America. One of the things, it was displaced other ant species, which what we are seeing in the Texas area, and has caused small livestock, especially chickens, to die of asphyxia. The numbers get so high that the ants can get in the nostrils and can irritate it, and the chickens then can start to die. So it's very important. They can become a very much of an ag pest at this time. Larger animals, such as cattle, have been attacked around the eyes, nasal fossae, and hooves. They're just a true nuisance, just being in an area of the cattle and all, and in the eyes. It can just be a nuisance, and the animals just can't rest, so they tend not to eat well, and they're agitated all the time. The ants have also caused grasslands to dry out. These ants do protect sucking insect pests, some of the hemitrums that emit the sugary honey mildew, or sugary honeydew that a lot of times we'll see as a mildew on different areas. And the ants will feed on this honeydew, and by essentially farming these ants or these other insects, they will keep other insects away, and they will protect these insects for the honeydew. There might be other medical concerns. We have some tests at A&M to see if there might be some, but this ant can be a problem just due to the sheer numbers. We do know it's a problem with electrical systems, as with any ant. They are attracted to electrical circuits, and the sheer number of this ant, we can shut down some units around the Houston Ship Channel and some chemical plants for days. And we're talking, like $1 million a day for some of these units to be shut down. So this ant is a true nuisance pest. Here's just a picture of some of the general aesthetics. You see here, you see the ants along the side here. These are all dead raspberry crazy ants, or tawny crazy ants. See them pile up here. Also, if anyone has put down a pesticide treatment in this area, wherever these ants start to stack up, they're live ants to just walk over the dead ants and essentially avoid the pesticide-treated area. So it's extremely important to sweep up the ants if they're in an area. And so if you do have a pesticide application there, the new ants or the live ants can come in contact with it. With industry, again, I mentioned the involvement on different circuits. Sometimes you can just blow these circuits out and reset them. Other times we have to replace the circuits themselves. So they can be very costly, this ant being present. In houses, again, you can see some pictures of the homes. You can see that not too many people would be pleased to see this picture in the mornings when they get up and from bed. So it's extremely important to do something to help manage these ants. This is an interesting picture. This is a master gardener greenhouse in South Harris County, and they have a problem with the raspberry crazy ant, and we are now working with them. They've become a small test site for us to see if there's different ways to manage them. So, are there treatments available? Yes, there are. The main thing is sanitation. We want to begin with the removal of harbors such as fallen limbs, rocks, leaf litter, and just about anything else sitting on the ground that isn't absolutely necessary to be there. Any type of wood around the house, move it. Okay, this ant also, it may be important that because the landscaping and their attending of these honeydew-producing insects, you might have to severely prune or remove landscape until you get this ant controlled. You might also want to alter the moisture condition of the landscape, not water your grass as much, repair any type of leaks you might have. They do prefer humid, wet conditions, so reducing any type of irrigation, repairing leaks can help in keeping the population down. You want to inspect anything being moved. One of the suspected reasons why East Columbia, Texas has the ant is that it maybe came in on some nursery stock that was infested from one of the local box stores. So it's extremely important if you are going to buy some type of a nursery plant, lift it up. If you see ants on the bottom of it, I would go to another location because you're just asking for trouble if you move that plant. Food sources should be eliminated or managed. Now, this is, as I mentioned, specifically honeydew-producing hemipterans. You can use some type of pesticides systemic insecticides such as imidacloprid or other systemic neonicotinoids. These are a good option for helping to control these insects on the plants, which should start to help in reducing the ants themselves because there's no insects there for them to tend. Again, you might need to severely prune or remove a landscape area if you are not going to use any type of chemical treatment on it. If your house or property is infested, in Texas, we recommend to call a professional pest control provider because a lot of the insecticides that are available are only available to pest control professionals. One of the products, the Termidor SC, is a termaticide, but also it can be used for the controlling of ants. In Texas, we have a quarantine exemption label for those counties where the ant has been ID'd. And this product is good and can be effective for several weeks when used appropriately. It only can be used twice a year, so you do want to plan your treatments. Phantom insecticide is the Termidor insecticide has the fipronil as active ingredient. The Phantom insecticide, chlorphenapyr, is an indoor treatment and works real well when used appropriately. There's also a granular treatment. Application of Top Choice or Taurus G can extend the fipronil barrier, and this may be considered. It's an expensive addition, but can be considered for controlling this pest. Temporary buffer zones using contact insecticides can be used. Many of these contain acephate or some of the pre-throid insecticides. There's bifenthrin, cypermethrin, cyfluthrin, deltamethrin. Lambda-cyhalothrin has been a product that has proved to have a little longer residual in our area, and many of our pest control professionals are choosing this product to use along with the Termidor SC. Granular fipronil can also be considered, but again, this is outside our treatment zone of the Termidor SC, which I will mention in a second. Alpine WSG is a new product that BASF has, a very, very green product. Indications are that it can be used and has good residual control, and it may be considered to be used in combination with your Termidor SC treatments. The tawny crazy ant workers are not attracted to most bait products. They are attracted to the advanced carpenter ant bait, but we recommend that this bait be used in early populations or building populations. Once the populations get very, very high, this bait just does not seem to be effective. There's also some information that the Max Force granular insect bait is showing promise. Right now, we're hoping to test this bait in the field and get more information, so it'll be another part of the puzzle to help control this ant. In Texas, we do have the quarantine exemption for Termidor SC. This shows the house being treated 3 foot up and 10 foot out. That is the quarantine exemption. Termidor SC normally is sprayed 1 foot up and 1 foot out. For normal applications for ant, before the quarantine exemption, we can go 3 foot up and 10 foot out for this product. There is coverage challenges. Remember, I mentioned about their severe pruning or removal of landscape plants. Here's a good example. Termidor SC is a very expensive product to put out, and all this does is hinder its effect. So this is something that the homeowner may consider that they do need to remove the landscape or severely prune it to make sure that the Termidor SC is there to do its job. The phantom inside, we have the same type of conditions. Clutter is not conducive to good pesticide. So what we want to do is remove the clutter, and then the barrier treatments can be much more effective. That concludes the information that I have for both the Argentine and the raspberry crazy ant. If you would like more information, there is the Urban Entomology website at Texas A&M. It's urbanentomology.tamu. Up here, tmu.edu, and they have the tawny crazy ant information. Plus, there is also information on the Argentine ant if you're in Texas or you want some information there. Of course, a good Google search on this will also bring up some information. There's a lot of IDing resources. The PCT manual is very, very good for ants. There's some other ant ID guides. We have an ID guide in Texas that we can use. But there are a lot of things out there. I highly recommend that if you are interested to look at one of these manuals, or if you're a pest control professional, someone that's going to be IDing, that these are very, very good manuals to help in IDing ants and different ant species. I just want to plug my blog spot, drfireant.blogspot.com. If you ever have nothing else to do and you want to go someplace, go to my blog. Sometimes I got something interesting posted there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bethany, and we can wrap this up. Go ahead, Bethany.
Thank you, Dr. Nestor. If you have any further questions, please type them in the chat box. And while we're waiting on that, Jeannie, would you mind putting up the survey, please? Take a few minutes to complete the on-screen survey, and then also there is going to be there's a more in-depth survey located at the link that you see listed on the slide, and we would love to have your participation in that as well. So thanks to all of you who moderated and everyone who tuned in. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you.